This episode was made possible by our incredible donors. Their faithful support allows us to continue the work of amplifying the voices of religious abuse survivors. We committed early on never to monetize any of the stories, so we rely solely on donations from people like you. If you value the work and are able to contribute, you can become a monthly donor at the link in our show notes. Another way to support Bodies Behind the Bus is by following, rating, and reviewing the podcast. It only takes a moment, but has a tremendous impact on our reach. Thank you for daring to listen. All right, everybody, this is a special alert. It's a great episode, special episode. We are thrilled to have, well, you can add author to his title now, so I'm going to start with author. Reverend Joash P. Thomas. He's an author, speaker, global advocate for liberation. He just wrote a book. I'm holding it up. I'm also going to have it in the show notes. It's coming out September 30th. It's called The Justice of Jesus. It's a great book. John and I were honored to get an advance copy of it.
Which is today.
Yes.
This is dropping on book launch day.
Okay, great. So this will come out today, and you should buy the book today. But we were able to get a copy ahead of the time. It's great. It's outstanding. You should definitely pick it up. So we are going to do a couple of episodes here with Joash. We're calling them Just Calling. Really, the purpose there is to talk about some of the things in the book, but also just any kind of topics out there today that relate to and correlate with some of the topics in the book. We'll be popping back on. We're going to have a few for sure. So this is the first of probably at least 3, and then we plan to have hopefully some more in the future. So that is a long-winded way of me saying, Joash, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the podcast again.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Jonna. So great to be back here. And yeah, this is awesome. This is, I get to launch a book today among friends. So excited.
We are thrilled to have you.
I am very excited for this book to be in the world. Jay and I reading through it, it felt like I think I've already said it publicly, but it's like a hug on a cold day, or like warmth. It's so gentle and kind, but practical. And I think right now, so many of us are feeling very, maybe like that Katy Perry song when she talks about being a plastic bag blowing through the wind. Everything feels bad, and we're all just like being thrown every direction, and really looking for some practical ways that we can be doing justice and not just freaking out about the injustice that's around us. So this is really birthed out of that. How can we've kind of diagnosed the problem. There's a lot of really smart people, scholars that are doing really good work to dive into why we are where we are. So the purpose of this is kind of, now what do we do with that? So welcome, Joash. I'm excited to jump in.
Yeah, this is great. And, just for some context on the whole diagnosing prognosis thing, the publishers described this book as a prophetic diagnosis and a hopeful prognosis. But when I originally wanted to write this book, I wrote more of a diagnosing book because that's the work being done right now from a decolonization lens. And then Brazos came to me and said, actually, we want to work with you, but would you do something more on the prognosis side? Because we're looking at the market right now, and there really isn't anything on the way forward here for the church. Will you give us something on that front? And so what ended up happening was the first 3 chapters end up being diagnosis, and then the next 6 chapters, the majority of the book ends up being a hopeful prognosis on where we go from here. So really excited to do this, and excited that these words get released into the world today.
Yeah, I found that refreshing too, the prognosis side and hopeful. I have not put a lot of hope in things that are out there in the market, I'll be honest, Joash. After reading things, it's just not a lot of hope of where do we go. And the way that you guide us through this hopeful prognosis, I like that term, is encouraging. And it's life-giving too. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but I feel like with this book, it helps us start that process. So I wanted to read a quote from your book. Can we read that quote from the book real quick, John, before we get into it? Awesome. Okay. I'm not going to give away too much of the book because you need to buy it and read it and rate it, give it 5 stars. But this is a great quote. It says, "It is impossible to love the church without being honest about the ways in which we have historically failed to love God and neighbor. And it is even more impossible to love Jesus, the head of the church, without being honest about the ways in which we continue to fail to love God and neighbor." What a beautiful, and I think that really does speak to the diagnosis and the hopeful prognosis of where this kind of how this book evolves and guides us through this. I think that quote really surmises that in a great way. So I'd love to get in and start talking about it if we can. If everybody's open to discussing this book and what we're also titling Just Calling, let's dive in. Okay, so you've given us a little bit of an overview of the book, Joash, but I would really want to know, what is the why behind this book or this conversation? Like, why do you think this is needed so much right now?
Yeah, such a great question. So I grew up in the Global South Evangelical Church and moved to the US when I was 18, and immediately realized that it's an alternate universe out here. Even among evangelicals, it was just a very different brand of evangelicalism, and one that I couldn't articulate this back then. But today, I would say Western evangelicalism is an evangelicalism that has been shaped by empire. And unfortunately, so much of Global South evangelicalism too. But the one thing that I've honed in on over my past many years living in North America as a 2-time immigrant now, first to the US and then to Canada, is it's just this reality that justice is seen as a threat to the gospel in the West. And that wasn't my experience growing up in the Global South Church. My experience was justice being seen as important, even if in some ways it was seen as less important than the spiritual aspects of the gospel. It was still seen as important. Now, in the book, I push back and say that we need to decolonize our understanding of justice by seeing it just as important as spiritual gospel stuff, because the gospel is both physical and spiritual. Jesus came to set us free spiritually and physically at the same time. But something else that I do in this book is I dive deep into my own indigenous, ancient Indian Christian ancestry, which is the St. Thomas Indian Church. So I think St. Thomas Indian Christians are the best kept secret in the global church, mainly because we receive the gospel directly from the Apostle Thomas, who came 2,000 years ago. And we have been everything from Orthodox to Catholic to Pentecostal. And so, my family has been Pentecostal for the past 5 generations on my dad's side, and Anglican Orthodox on my mom's side. And there's so much wisdom there. There's so much ancient wisdom there that I think needs to be retrieved. And so much of this ancient Christian wisdom from this tradition was actually burned by, literally the church documents were burned by our colonizers because they didn't want those values to get out. Values like ecumenism and pluralism and living at peace with our Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, non-Christian neighbors, right? And so anyway, my hope for this book is that it retrieves a lot of those values of the ancient church, of the global church, all for the sake of flourishing of our marginalized neighbors, and especially the people that you serve at Bodies Behind the Bus, survivors of abuse.
Yeah, and I think it's, again, as we go through the book, I do believe, one of the things you talk about is bringing I shouldn't say bringing those values back, but you're honestly, some of these values you're really introducing, I think, to people that have never really heard or even thought about them. So you're giving a new perspective. And one of the ways that I always, that I've struggled with the church in America specifically, and I just want to talk about the church in America, is that we're so closed down to just new perspectives, new voices. And when we build things even outside of church spaces and communities like this, like survivor communities, we build the same thing over and over again. And it's because we don't just sit down and say, you know what? We've screwed this up pretty good the last 300 years. Maybe we interject with some new voices. And the way that you bring these topics in the pages to the book, you bring them to life, you paint out examples of not only history, but what churches are doing in Canada, I find super fascinating and super encouraging to see that the work can be done. There's one thing you reference, I don't want to give it away too much, but they have old carpet in their church, and they're like, you know what? Like, we don't care. We're going to deal with the old carpet. And I forgot the line that you say in the book, but essentially it's like they chose, faithfulness over like newness or something like that. Like that's where their priority was. And just the way that you phrase it and say it, it just makes sense. You're like, it's like your brain clicks and you're like, yeah, we don't need new carpet. Like who cares? Like that's what matters most is and I forgot what they were helping with that community. I think they were either, I'd have to go back and look at it, but the community,
Yeah.
what community?
Trafficking.
Trafficking.
I mean, they're
That was
super
it.
engaged in
Yes.
trafficking locally and globally.
Yes.
And they know that the cost of installing a new carpet is tremendous, but they would rather deal with the ugly bright orange, actually, shag rug in the church than not give generously towards their marginalized neighbors. And that's the kind of sacrifice that Jesus invites us to in the work of justice. Yeah, thanks for bringing up that story, Jay.
Yeah, I think you do a great job with the stories and it's super helpful and relatable for all of us to see these real world examples of people that are bringing justice forward in their current context, and how you drive that back to, not only your where you came from, but also like how far removed we are from these basic principles that we have polluted with our own, building empire and colonization with things that we've done. I think that it's refreshing to just take a breath and say, yeah, there's another way to look at this. And it's okay if we look at it this way, because it may give us more life. And that's when I read your book, I was like, man, that's what people need to be like. Hey, it's okay if we give these things up because they're not serving us well. There is another way to look at justice and to look at serving others that may be refreshing to our spirit and to those around us.
Yeah, Jay. And here's what I'd also say based on what I'm hearing you saying. You talked about how church leaders in the U.S. specifically look at these ideas as new, essentially, and it's like, oh, this is a threat to the gospel. Here's what I would say to an American church leader, maybe even listening to this and feeling that way. What if I told you that your way of looking at God and neighbor is actually the new polluted way, right? A way that's been shaped by colonization and empire, and that for 1,500 years before that new way showed up, that narrow way of understanding the gospel, there have been Christians in parts of the world like India who've practiced a very different understanding of the gospel that they received directly from the apostles. And they lived on the margins this whole time. They weren't polluted with power, access to political power. So in many ways, theirs is a more pure, ancient form of the gospel that includes justice for marginalized people. And your perspective of the gospel is only spiritual and it's a get out of hell free card is completely new. It's completely innovated. And, the early church would have nothing to do with that kind of what they called Gnosticism.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And it's so true. We could probably talk a lot about that. Johnny, you have your mic off. I'll let you interject because I have thoughts there, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut for a moment.
I'd love to kind of dive into a little bit about why we're doing this as a series. So I think if you've been around for a long time on Bodies Behind the Bus, we'll have authors on and off or experts on and off as At the Bus Stop episodes. But we wanted these to have a special place in our feed under Just Calling. And I would say that a lot of that is birthed out of conversations between Joash and I, and really the friendship that we have and the space that he's given me to ask hard questions and awkward questions, and really process through things. I mean, I think back to one of the more in-depth conversations that we had together. maybe a year and a half ago now, like a while ago, was me asking, is white supremacy the thing, or is that a fruit of something? And us kind of wrestling through that, like, actually, maybe it is this upside down theology of power and that we're just addicted to it. And white supremacy is a huge fruit of that in the US church. But like, maybe we even need to dig deeper than that. Like, maybe we have to keep going. And you've allowed so much space for that. And so as we were talking about just calling, we kind of had this vision of being able to have conversations where we're allowed to be awkward and we're allowed to engage these conversations with humility and care for each other and curiosity, and not be afraid of being shamed or outcast or saying the wrong thing and not being able to own those things. Like, there's just a lot of safety in our friendship. And so it felt like a good way to bring the audience into that and sort of model, what does that look like to be safe friends and to have these conversations in community? And we've also noticed a pattern within the spaces that both of us are in, that we continue to put certain figures on pedestals to like lead the charge whenever we're seeing different justice movements popping up. And there's partially there's a reality to the fact that like leaders exist and leaders are always going to exist. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And that's okay. But often what we see is people thinking, well, that is for them. Like, that person has all this capacity, and so they're going to lead that. Like, Jonna and Jay have like all this capacity to just throw out Bodies Behind the Bus episodes. Like, well, that's debatable based on our faces right now. But like, justice isn't just for Joash or Jonna or Jay or other people that are working in advocacy spaces. This type of justice that Jesus is bringing us into and calls us to as believers is for everyone. It's not just for the heroes. It's not just for the people that are leading like these giant marches. It's for you and me in our everyday. And just like what Jay was referencing in your book, the faithful decisions that we make. So I hope that kind of sets us up to dive into some of the little bit of like deeper definitions of things we're going to be talking about. Specifically, you talk a lot about colonization and decolonization. And before you turn this episode off because you think we're talking about a buzzword, let's let Joash define these things for us so we can move further into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Jonna. And what I'm going to say before I define colonization and decolonization is that I've appreciated our conversation so much, and I've actually shared one of our conversations in the book. So Jonna, Bodies Behind the Bus, is in the book because it very much has shaped. I have learned so much from the community that listens to this podcast, that comes and shares their stories here, because these are people on the margins, people who've been marginalized and hurt and abused by the church. And I repent for that as an ordained minister and leader in the church. It's a shame. And the reason why I wrote this book is so that we can take a look under the hood of this bus and fix the darn bus, right? I would have said damn, but I don't know why I said darn. Fix the damn bus. It's broken. It's hurting people. It's throwing people off the bus and running all over them. And the thing I came across as I was looking at the structure of the bus and under the hood of the bus, the thing I came across was this thing called colonization and the way in which it has shaped our theology, whether we realize it or not. So in my book, throughout the book, I say that colonization wasn't just bad for the global South. It was also bad for the Western church because it shaped us to resist justice for our marginalized neighbors here. It shaped us to shun people asking questions, shun survivors who've been spiritually abused in the church. Colonization shaped us as well. And this is the reality of injustice, right? So I've been doing justice work in international human rights over the past decade. And what you see doing the work of justice, especially as a clergyman in the church for me, is this doesn't just hurt our marginalized neighbors. Injustice is also bad for the oppressors and those on their side. because it shapes them, and it robs their own humanity as they participate in these injustices. And the same is going to be true for people who, who have oppressed me and who have been abusive towards me too. Like, at the end of the day, I feel bad for them. Like, once I recover from my trauma, and I have the privilege to see the ways in which it hurts them too, I feel really bad for them because it's not good for them either. But going back to your definitions of colonization and decolonization, so what I say throughout the book is that for people like me, for Christians from the global South, colonization isn't just an academic theory or a concept. It's lived experience for us. Like, I grew up in India celebrating 15th August as Independence Day. Independence from what? The Brits, who left our country about 75 years ago. Now, why were the Brits in our country? Well, they were there to not build the trains out of the goodness of their heart. They were building trains so they could loot our countries and exploit it. I mean, the very word loot is a Hindi word that the Brits came up with while they were stealing the resources from my country and from so many countries across the global South. And these weren't just economic resources. These are human resources too. So it's not just wealth and diamonds and things like that. It's also people in slavery. So, in Canada, there's a large Caribbean community. And I go to church with a lot of Caribbean folks who look like me. Why do they look like me? Because their ancestors were taken from India to Guyana or other parts of the Caribbean to work there as slaves. And generations later, these folks are rediscovering their identities that were stolen because of colonization, because of the transatlantic slave trade that was a symptom of colonization. So for people like me, it's lived experience. You hear stories growing up in the global South Church of how your country was once rich, 20% of the world's GDP, and that got completely decimated to like 1% of the world's GDP after 150 years of British colonialism. So it's lived experience for us. And again, it's shaped the Western Church because it harmed us. It shaped us to resist justice for marginalized people everywhere. So what's decolonization? Well, decolonization in a faith context to me is taking a look under the hood and seeing why we believe what we believe today, why we shun people to the side, why we marginalize them when they ask questions, why we tell survivors of abuse, you need to forgive more than expect justice. It comes from this thing of colonization and this history of the Western Church telling colonized people and enslaved people, Jesus cares more about your spiritual freedom than your physical freedom and well-being. So just put your faith in him. Everything will be okay in the afterlife, as an excuse to ignore their own participation in the oppression of these people. And so that's how I frame colonization and decolonization, as real historical events that shaped the global church, both on the Western side and the global South side.
I have a question for you that could throw a wrench into things and might have to
Please.
get edited out because this is just something that's coming to my brain right now.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with Robert Callahan, who's one of our board members, this week, actually, and we were talking about white supremacy, Calvinism, worm theology, and some of the the rhetoric being used in the U.S. government right now, specifically like White House accounts, like some of the ways that dehumanization is being used. And it was kind of a light bulb moment for him of thinking, oh, wow, wait a second. This is like the dehumanization that happens when you have to believe in worm theology or something like Calvinism, like you're dirt, you're trash, but God just decided this one person is saved. So they are set apart, but everybody else like is trash unless God chooses to save them. Did Calvinism come from colonization?
I love it. You're asking all the right questions here, Jana. Yeah, Calvinism 100% is linked to colonization. In fact, I would say much of the Protestant Reformation came around the time of colonialism, really, and was shaped by colonialism. While Luther and the others and Calvin and others were doing this, I mean, it was these societies that would later than, or even at that time, actually. So, the Portuguese arrived in India in 1498. That was a long time ago. And that was about a half decade before the Reformation movement, right? So it's all connected. And, you know, and if you're part of Western church institutions that have a papal bull or a bit of a mandate to go and exploit, other countries, then absolutely. So the Dutch Reformed Church, for example, participated in colonialism. The Church of England, that is very reformed in its theology, also participated in colonialism. So there is a direct linkage between Calvinism and colonialism. And if you don't believe me, look at some of the best Reformed scholars, like even the most justice-minded Calvinistic scholars, people like Abraham Kuyper, were strong apologists of colonialism. And so I had a phase where I was voraciously reading Abraham Kuyper because I was like back in my Calvinist phase where I was like, oh, this is, he's talking about justice. Look, there's one reformed guy talking about justice. And then someone was like, oh, he was a racist, by the way, who was all about supporting the Dutch colonies in Indonesia and India. And that puts things in perspective too. So I think there's a direct correlation between worm theology. I love the way you phrased it, of, thinking I am a piece of crap. I am not worthy of God's love. And telling that to colonized and enslaved people, you are a piece of crap. You are not worthy of God's love. You should thank us for bringing the gospel to you. You shouldn't complain when we enslave you or colonize you, because you are a piece of crap. You deserve death. You deserve the worst. But here we are as saviors. You should thank us. You should help us loot your countries. You should help us steal yourselves of your identities. And it was all in service of empire at the end of the day and not Jesus.
And part of what we were talking about with that, as you're saying this, is just how do people that claim Jesus co-sign that? And we were kind of having this moment together, like, oh, if you believe like you are crap from the moment you take a breath on this earth and everybody else is too, then it's really not that hard to watch bad things happen to people because you've dehumanized yourself so much that it's easy to dehumanize everyone else around you. And that's why this type of like this deep-rooted theological abuse is so bad for everyone. It's bad for, like you say, it's not just bad for the people that are being oppressed. It's also bad for the oppressors.
Like how you threw out the papal bull. I've read a lot about that recently, and just that charge. You talk about manifest destiny. Is manifest destiny? Does that come up in your book too? That's
yeah, that was more in the context of the States,
Yeah.
which definitely affected our indigenous neighbors here. So
Yeah.
settler colonialism.
Very similar.
Papal bull.
Yeah, very similar kind of thought process. That's where I was trying to go with it. And it's interesting too, like how I can't say it. How we have made
Individualistic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
God, my brain's frozen. But we should keep all of that too. Keep it all. But how that is very much driven into, especially like manifest destiny and papal bull and like all of those kind of theories in the early 1400s until the 1700s and on in America, and how it changed. Again, this is my opinion. How it changed our perception of God to make it very much driven about personal relationship and not having a sacred, looking at God through the sacred of like the earth and the community and the environment and all of those things, and how empire continues to rip those things down and more to exploit resources, people, and the pursuit of growth. And when I was reading your book and I was going through it, it's like you're kind of sticking your finger in the hole of this sinking ship, and you're saying, and you're offering a life raft. You're saying, hey, there's a life raft over here, but the what it's going to take, and this is what I want your opinion on, is like, it really does take a really deep look in your own life to say, you have to be okay saying, you know what, maybe I've gotten this wrong, or maybe the way I look at things is not the best. And I would love your take on, like, how do you invite readers, listeners to take that journey? Because our defense mechanism is going to be, I'm going to put a wall up, and we really can't put those walls up. Like, we've got to come in and be open. So what would you say to that, to someone who's like, I want to believe, but to John's point, I hate myself so much, or I just don't know how to take that first step?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And it's something that I've had to practice myself, because at one point, I mean, we all have, all three of us have these testimonies of Jesus rescuing us again, right? And so for me, I guess I've got two of those testimonies. One is, I used to be a Republican political consultant in a past lifetime in Georgia, and I've had to repent so much of the things that I participated in back then that harmed my neighbors. But my other testimony is, I used to be a pastoral intern at a Southern Baptist church plant in Atlanta about 5 years ago, and not too long ago, right? And I have had to go on this journey of examining these harmful theologies that I've been a part of, and deconstructing that, and realizing that deconstruction wasn't enough, because it ultimately doesn't do anything for my marginalized neighbor. I need to decolonize my theology to actually understand what's going on here, to remove the hindrances that keep me from loving neighbors and seeking justice for them. And the reason why I shared my story is because I think we're all on a journey at the end of the day. And I think there are people even listening to this podcast right now, this very moment in time, who are in different places in their journey. And what I would say, wherever you are in your journey right now, the thing I want to invite you to do is to look for a neighbor who doesn't have the privileges that you do. So I am a brown man. I have male privilege, and I have learned so much from the perspective of white sisters in Christ, like Jana and Beth Allison Barr and others who have written books or done podcasts. And I've learned from their perspectives. Now, they have more privilege than me, being white and being part of the majority culture. I have people make assumptions of me that they wouldn't make of them because of the color of my skin. But I also have privilege as a male, because I can walk into rooms and say things and not be as interrupted as even a white sister would. So both of these realities are true at the same time. So what I would invite people to do is look for someone who doesn't have a privilege that you do. It could be a disabled neighbor. It could be someone, if you're in leadership, could be someone who doesn't have a position of leadership. It could be, someone who's neurodivergent in ways different from you, if you're neurotypical. But look for someone like that and ask them questions, and process theological things with them, and say, here's what I believe. Here's what I've been raised to believe. How does this hit you? How does this land for you? And I think what we'll realize is that what we have been conditioned to believe is the good news is not actually good news for most of our marginalized neighbors. And if Jesus, in his definition of the gospel in Luke chapter 4:18, says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor, to set the captive free, to set free the oppressed, if that's how he defines the gospel, then clearly we've got some work to do in reclaiming that original version of the gospel that's been corrupted by power and empire and privilege. And so I would say, yeah, filter your theological thoughts through people on the margins, inside and outside the church, and see what the Spirit is teaching you from those conversations, and incorporate that into your journey. See where that takes you.
And I would even invite us all to care enough about ourselves, like our individual selves, to ask ourselves hard questions
Hmm.
and care enough about our legacy and the truth and the things we say we believe to be curious about them and to be uncomfortable and to sit in that. I think I know we have been taught that um, asking questions like this or sitting with uncomfortable things can be seen as evil or wrong or even sinful. Like, you doubt this or that, all of that nonsense. We need to be able to put that on the table, say, this is what I was taught. I'm immediately going to feel uncomfortable. And that uncomfortability doesn't need to mean I hate myself more. That's what we're trying to work ourselves out of. It can mean like, I love who God created me to be, and I love who God created everyone else on this earth to be. And how can we see the image of God in each other? And how can we see that image and then work to make this a more beautiful kingdom here and now? And what does that look like for us, each little faithful step, as we ask hard questions and we are curious? I think so often when we hear these conversations, especially in like white deconstruction spaces, there's just this element of fundamentalism and shame and like self-hatred that that people walked out church doors with and then just brought it into their deconstruction experience. And that is why decolonizing is where we need to be stepping. It's not deconstruction in the way that it's being offered in these spaces. It's actually taking the time to sit with yourself and to say, what does God say about me? What does God say about image bearers? And how can I be curious about the teachings that I have clung to based on that understanding?
That's so good. Yeah, I love that. And I love how you just brought that down to an individual level as well, Jonna. I think it's so easy to get caught up in the systems without realizing that there are people, there are individuals behind these systems and trapped behind these systems of empire, really. Both the oppressed and the oppressor are ultimately victims of their own doing. And this is why you often have people who've been a part of the oppressor class in the Western church, you know, come out of it and say things like, oh my goodness, it actually robbed my humanity. It did so much to me too. And I need to go on an apology tour and apologize to a bunch of people.
I think it would be helpful if you share so many examples in your book, Joash, of what when communities do prioritize decolonization or decolonizing, it really does change the way they approach neighbor, the way they approach faith. Could you share maybe one example that really stands out to you of what that looks like in a real world scenario for a faith community?
Yeah. So, one of the best things for me to do as I was writing this book was just to collect and curate stories of churches and Christian communities around the world that are doing this well. Um, I think the example that I'll give here is from the Global South Church. And I think it's going to be true also for the Western Church. I don't think we've done enough of this. In the Global South, I've interacted with bishops from the Church of England, like the Anglican Church, and the Catholic Church. And the level of self-awareness that these leaders have is incredible. They are the first to apologize for their denomination's participation in colonialism. They're the first to acknowledge. They're the first to initiate conversation. And I think there's so much that we as the Western Church could learn from that, because we have an entire denomination in the U.S., the largest Protestant denomination that was founded on slaveholding, on the question of whether or not missionaries can own slaves. And they barely even acknowledge their own history of being slaveholders. And when the Southern Baptist Convention fails to acknowledge its own history of participating in colonialism, it then ends up perpetuating other types of abuses and harms in the Western Church. So, women in the church, for example, LGBTQ people in the church, poor people in the church, Black people in the church, right, all end up being harmed when they fail to reckon. So I know you asked me for a positive example and not a negative example here, but all to say, for every negative example, I think there are positive examples out there too across the global church if we have the eyes to see Jesus everywhere. Yeah, another example that comes to mind for me in that same vein is the Church of England. And I've seen this when speaking to European Christians. Their acknowledgement of colonialism is at a whole other level. And I mean, they were the ones who invented it in many ways and franchised it out to the world, but they really have this humility and self-awareness. So one example, again, the Church of England, a few years ago, a couple of years before I wrote the book, there was this reckoning that happened in the Church of England where the body of the Church of England, and I share the story in the book, so I'm probably butchering the story that I share in the book here, but their financial investment company basically came back to the Church of England and said, hey, we have found that a lot of your financial investments from a couple of hundred years ago were in the slave trade industry, specifically slave ships, were funded with church money, Church of England money. And of course, it was a profitable business. That's what kept it going. So you made a ton of wealth from it. And so much of the wealth that you've inherited as the Church of England, as the Anglican Church today, is because of colonialism and because of the transatlantic slave trade. Like, you put in money, you got much more money out of it. And so this, for the Church of England, then raised all sorts of theological questions of what do we do with this awareness? Now, we can change the past, but we can be faithful in the present, I think, is what they decided to say. And so they end up announcing this multi-million-dollar fund to give reparations back to communities that were robbed by slavery and their participation in the transatlantic slave trade. And they even acknowledged that, hey, this isn't enough money. Like, we actually made a lot more money than what we're giving out here, but it's something. It's a start. And what I find really interesting is, as the Church of England leadership is doing this, you have a movement of more conservative Church of England churches saying, hold up, wait a second. What about gospel work? Like, our churches are struggling right now to have enough people attend and give. What about the front lines? They called it. We should be putting money into the front lines and not doing this reparation stuff. And it's fascinating. And I poke holes in their definition of the front line in my book because why are we not seeing the work of justice as frontline works? Why are we not seeing, when we've harmed someone and benefited off of their stolen wealth and resources, like, why do we not see them as the front line? Why do we not acknowledge their humanity? And the same is true for survivors of abuse in the church that listen to this podcast and that you serve as a community. What about their voices? What about reparations towards them? Why? I mean, I don't need to tell the listener of this podcast how hurtful it must feel when you see a church that has abused you go about pretending nothing ever happened and do this multi-million-dollar evangelism campaign or capital campaign to build a building to attract more people, to dump more bodies behind the bus, right? What's the deal with that? Isn't that frontline work, the people you've harmed, right? But unfortunately, there are a lot of leaders within the Church of England, a small minority, but significant, who think that isn't frontline's work. And I think things like this tell us so much about ourselves. Yeah.
And that feeling as a listener right now that's bubbling up in you, that's like, that doesn't connect. The idea that justice and frontline is not the same thing. What is that? It really goes back to what Joash is talking about how our faith has been colonized, and this idea that souls and bodies are not both important and like intrinsically together, and we can't separate those, and we can't just care for someone's soul without caring about their body. Like, that is all together, and we can't separate it. But
Right.
that's what this view of frontline work actually does, is it says these people who we have caused harm for, who we can be faithful towards, and who we can work towards healing the brokenness that we were a part of, they are back burner to advancing the mission. And that is a mission that is void of caring about the wholeness and the humanity of each other, the part of us that carries the image of God. We have to shove that down in order to do, air quotes, this frontline work that is being spoken about. And that weird tension you feel in your chest right now as you're trying to sift through that, that is some of the root of what we really are trying to talk about here on Bodies Behind the Bus. Every time you hear a story, is we're not just telling stories to tell stories and air out the church's dirty laundry, whether or not our reviews say that or not. Like, we actually want to examine these things and say, we should be stopping, like, pause the advancement of this mission that is being so heavily pushed is at this human cost. And we have not reckoned with the harm that we have done in order to take any steps forward yet. So that reckoning is actually a step forward if we decide to do it together.
Right. 100%. And, something else I'd also say, just hearing your thoughts, Jana, is that this whole let's ignore the bodies behind the bus so that more souls get saved is not the way of Jesus. That's the way of the colonizer. That's quite literally what colonizers did. And we practice that in the way we do church and the way we do mission in the Western church. We don't see that as important because we've bought the colonizer's gospel of, justice is important, but it's not as important as evangelism or discipleship. Or Jesus cares more about your soul than your body, which is totally not the way of Jesus. And you don't see any evidence of Jesus in the Gospels doing this. You see him always caring for the bodies of the people he comes into contact with by healing them, by setting them free from demonic oppression, from, by feeding them, by performing all kinds of miracles that bring wholeness to their bodies. That's the way of Jesus. And that's Christian mission. Christian mission is pursuing the wholeness of the world around us here and now, in our communities, inside and outside the church. And the colonizer's gospel will tell the justice seeker in the church, no, that's not frontline work. That's a distraction. That's a threat. That's the social gospel.
And I will even push on the idea that discipleship and justice are separate.
Right.
Like, what are we discipling people into?
Right.
If not the justice of Jesus? Like, that is how we show up on this earth as Jesus followers, as the hands and feet of Jesus. It's through justice, whether that looks like seeing someone that needs food and giving them food, or whether it looks like standing up when you see someone who's experienced abuse in the church and utilizing the voice that you have and the privilege you have in the moment to speak up and to call for goodness and to call for repentance in the situation and protection.
This has been just such a great conversation today, and I'm looking forward to future ones. There's so much more to discuss. There is hope. There's so much hope. And Joash, this book is filled with just examples of why Jesus is very much alive in the church and very much moving in the church, and wants us to feel that hope. But we've just got to be willing to, I would say this on the West side, we've just got to be willing to just be okay to be a little uncomfortable and start listening and questioning things. And the way that you help us do that is just and I mean this, is such a light, it is such a breathable, warm embrace of saying, hey, like, you're still loved, you still matter, you still has purpose. There's a beautiful
Yeah.
world of justice out there, a beautiful world filled with things that when we stand for justice, we can see so much goodness. So I appreciate that voice, and we need it so much right now. So looking forward to continuing the conversation. Josh,
Yeah.
anything you'd like to say about
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. So my bishop, Chris Green, has a podcast that sometimes runs for 2 hours. And when we ask him, why do you let your podcast run that long? He says, well, the good stuff only comes out an hour into the podcast. So I'm really glad that we're doing a part 2 and a part 3, because I think this conversation will just get better and better, especially as people have a chance to read the book and process its content, and maybe come back here with questions that we hopefully answer, or send us questions. We can look into that as well. But I'd love to continue the conversation, and again, I hope we're also processing this content from the book in our communities, because ultimately, the work of justice was always meant to be done in community and not in isolation. And that's also why I have discussion questions at the end of every chapter in the book. So looking forward to continuing the conversation here.
Joash, congratulations. Go buy the book,
Justice
guys.
of Jesus.
It's a big day.
It's out today.
Yes, go get the book. Thanks for joining us.